everyone, to the Buttercup podcast, where we talk about early childhood topics. Today, my guest is Dr. Walter Gilliam. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Gilliam.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Macy. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Dr. Walter S. Gilliam is the Elizabeth Mears and House Jameson Professor of Child Psychiatry and Psychology at the Yale Child Study Center and Director of Yale's Edward Zigler Center in Child Development and Social Policy. Dr. Gilliam is Vice President of 0 to 3, a past President of Child Care Aware of America, Board Treasurer of the Irving Harris Foundation, and a Board Director for Children's Finance. First Children's Finance, and all our kin, and a former Senior Advisor to the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Dr. Gilliam is a co-recipient of the prestigious 2008 Grawemeyer Award in Education for his co-authored book, A Vision for Universal Preschool Education. His research and scholarly writing addresses early childhood care and education, early childhood mental health, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on children and adults in early care and education, school readiness, developmental assessment of young children, and race and gender disparities in early childhood, as well as issues of COVID-19 transmission, vaccination, and health and safety promotion in early childhood settings. He is most known for his work on preschool expulsion and suspension, in early childhood mental health consultation, and race and gender bias in early childhood settings. His work frequently has been covered in major national and international news outlets, and he actively provides consultation to state and federal decision makers. So my first question, Dr. Gilliam, how did you get started in the early education field?
Oh, that's it's a great question. It's a little bit of a complicated one for me because it wasn't very straightforward for me. It was a bit of a circuitous route to get there. I started out as a music teacher. I was a K through 12 music teacher in a small rural school in eastern Kentucky. And so I taught elementary school music in the mornings and middle school music and high school band. And my wife was a biology and chemistry teacher. So it was a very small school, all the grades K through 12 in one big building. And I was the music department for the school, and she was the science department. And so we had that life for a couple of years. And in the time that we were teaching there, 2 children committed suicide, and another child died in a motorcycle accident near the school, and another student died from suicide having graduated from the school the year before. She was in college. And we, as a school, we didn't really have plans for how to deal with student suicides, and we didn't know what to do. We did a lot of things that I think were incredibly well intended, but not really planned, because there really wasn't much of a plan. And we brought in the outside experts to try to do the grief counseling, but of course, children don't want to talk to people they don't know. They want to talk to the people that they do know. But then how do you do that when the people that they do know are grieving just as much as the children? Because this is a small rural school where the teachers that teach there, they didn't in many cases just teach these children. They taught these children's parents too. And everybody knows everybody. And so we did some things that may have very well played into a contagion. And as a result, I wasn't teaching a lot of music. I was more like a grief counselor who didn't know what he was doing. And it caused me to rethink what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought, well, maybe I love music. Well, I thought before, maybe I loved music and liked working with children, but then it made me rethink maybe it's the other way around, and that I really wanted to work with children at a much deeper kind of level, and music could be a hobby. And so I went to graduate school and decided to get a Ph.D. in school psychology, because I wanted to find ways to work within schools around around psychological and mental health services and things like that. And I knew that I figured, I mean, this might be getting a little bit more personal than what you expected with it, but I figured I would probably have a hard time getting into a clinical psychology program because my background is not in psychology. My background was in music and music education. So I developed my pitch that I would try to get into a doctoral program in school psych, and I would tell them, wouldn't it be great to have at least one student who's actually worked in schools? So that was my pitch, and it seemed to have worked, and I got into the program, and they had enough stipends to be able to pay for graduate students, to be able to have a stipend to live on. And I didn't have money, and we didn't have any money. We were just teachers, and we didn't get paid a lot of money. So I needed to be on one of these grants. And at the time, it was in the early 90s. And one of them it was a U.S. Department of Education training grant to train school psychologists to work with children with attention deficit disorder, ADHD. And that was hot at the time. And then they had another training grant to train school psychologists to work with preschoolers with developmental disabilities. And the reason why was because not too long before then, we had just passed federal legislation that included preschool age children with developmental disabilities into the IDEA special education legislation. And so they had these two different mechanisms. And I really wanted to get on the ADHD training mechanism because sometimes children commit suicide for very impulsive reasons. I thought that at least that was conceptually similar to the things that I really wanted to learn more about, having to do with suicide prevention and postvention and mental health services around that. But because they had enough to go around, they decided in a way that only, like, I suppose, a university would ever think, if you entered into the program on an odd number year, they'd put you in the ADHD training grant. And if you entered into the program on an even number year, they'd put you in the preschool training grant. And I got there in 92. So they put me in the preschool training grant. I was disappointed at first, but then I spent a lot of time with Head Start teachers and with Part B special education teachers in preschool, 619 teachers in preschool special education, and childcare providers and early intervention specialists. And I just absolutely fell in love with the work that they do. They're working with these incredibly young, wonderful children, and they're trying to be a source of prevention in their life. And I fell in love with their work. I fell in love with them. I fell in love with the concept of the upstream intervention, and how do you help children upstream so you don't have, an even more challenging set of issues later on down the stream. Like if I really cared about children committing suicide in their high school years, I should care all the more about them when they're really young, when the unmet needs haven't led to a symptomatology with them that has started to strip away how much care can be wrapped around them. Why not work with them when their teachers haven't given up on them yet and their parents still think they're going to grow up to be president? And if you wait any longer, it's not like it becomes any easier. It becomes harder. And in many cases, they're not quite so cute anymore, and so a lot of their social supports start to sort of move away. That would be the time to be able to be helpful. And so I just really, I had a conversion moment, I guess, in graduate school as a result of that, and got exposed to policy and the concept that, the world is filled full of heroes for children. But some of the times the rules are not written in a way for the heroes to win. And so maybe part of my job could be trying to change some of the rules so that the heroes can win more frequently. And so that was what happened in my graduate school years. And then I targeted Yale for my postdoc because it was one of the few places that could get me involved in prenatal services and get me involved in NICUs and, what happens in the very first days of children's lives. And it gave me an opportunity to work with Edward Zigler, the father of Head Start. And so that's really how my career got to where it was. And then from that point on, it was just mostly finding as many opportunities as I can to broaden the perspective that I can and to be as much service to the lives of young children, families, and the amazing, incredible people who serve them.
Yes. Wow, that's
It's
so.
it's a lot. I said a lot of words. I hope I didn't go too long. You can
No,
feel
it's
free to
wonderful.
cut some of that if you want.
No, it's wonderful. And I love that you started off as a music educator, and so many people in our field do. And Fred Rogers is a great example, who started off as a music educator like you. And I was going to ask you later on about Dr. Zigler, but since you brought him up, the father of Head Start, do you want to tell us who he is?
Sure. Well, he was my mentor. He passed away in February of 2019, a little bit before the pandemic. And he was raised poor. His family had moved to the United States from Poland, and they didn't speak English. And he grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and was born in 1930, and later became a professor at Yale, and was tapped by the Lyndon Baines Johnson administration to be a part of a planning committee to design what Head Start would look like. And he was by far the youngest person on the planning committee at the time, which then meant that later on in his life, he was the only living member of the Head Start planning committee, the only person still alive that was in the smoke-filled rooms when they were deciding, what Head Start would look like. And Head Start's a huge program. I mean, that's a massive investment in the lives of children and families, billions of dollars a year, or serves close to about 1 million children every single year, 37 million over the course of its existence. It's been around for over 50 years now. And so he was the father of that, and was part of that planning committee in '65 that put that together as part of the war on poverty and at the height of the civil rights movement. And then later during the Nixon administration, he ran it and worked directly with Richard Nixon. He used to like to say that he was one of the few people he knew in the Nixon administration that didn't have to go to jail for the things he did. His things were all about children and helping children. He had this quote that was I think it was in the Washington Post, that somebody wanted to ask him, "Are you a Democrat or are you a Republican?" And people kept asking him that kind of stuff. And he said, "Politics, children are my politics." And that became sort of a hallmark for him. When he left government, he came back to Yale as a professor again and created a center to try to train people in how to think about child development and policy together in the same breath. Like, how do you understand what children and families and those who serve them need? And then how do you understand the policy structures well enough to be able to change those rules, to be able to make it to where we can do better by our children and families and those who serve them, And so he came back to Yale and set up a center to do that kind of stuff. But then not too long after he came back to Yale, he was tapped by the Ford administration at the fall of Saigon, because at the fall of Saigon, there was at that time, world's largest child baby airlift, because all the children around Saigon, mostly children of GIs, had to be evacuated. And they were putting them on planes and helicopters, and they were bringing them to the United States. And we didn't have any plan for what to do with them. And Ed was on vacation, and he got a telephone call from the White House and asked if he would come back into government to figure out what to do with these children who are being relocated to the United States, a country they've never been to before, at the fall of Saigon. And by the way, they're in the air right now. And so, I mean, the amount of stuff that man had done in his lifetime for children and families, both in terms of like long-term planning for big, huge structures like Head Start, but also, in the crisis moments, like at the fall of Saigon and things like that. The CDA, the Child Development Associate's Credential, that was his idea. So many of the things that are within the field of early care and education were things that he was very much a part of. And most of his work really stemmed from the very beginnings of his academic career, where he was studying children with intellectual difficulties and disabilities. And he did this research that tried to understand why we have children who score lower than other children on IQ tests, and why do we diagnose them as having intellectual disabilities. And at the time, it was very common to think about the syndrome of intellectual disabilities as having sort of like people who have intellectual disabilities at the time were believed to be more labile, more aggressive, more easily frustrated, all these other different things. And Ed thought that was ridiculous. He thought that people with intellectual disabilities develop personalities just like everybody else, because they're human just like everybody else. And that people develop their personalities based on the context in which they're placed. And if you're in a context where your needs are being frustrated on a constant basis, then of course you're going to develop a more frustrated kind of personality because you're being frustrated. So he did this ingenious study back in the 50s, early on in his career, 60s, early 60s, early on in his career, where he looked at children with intellectual disabilities and matched them based on IQ, and compared those who were raised in a more home-like setting, where they were giving the maximum amount of freedom, basically least restrictive environment before that was a term, and compared to those who were placed in institutions where their needs were being frustrated on a daily basis, but were matched in terms of their IQ points, and was able to easily show that it's not the IQ that was leading to this. It was the way we treated people, the way we treated individuals. And as a person who himself had grown up in poverty, he also realized the effects of poverty on children and families. And so much of his work really was around humanizing people who might have challenges that are different than other people's challenges, and people who might have been raised in poverty and have the challenges of that, and trying to give them the supports that they need to be able to have the maximum levels of freedom that they could enjoy, so that they're not frustrated so much. And so much of the things that he had done really kind of flowed from that. That's a little bit about him. Thank you for asking me about him. I miss him.
And the documentary that you're making, do you want to?
Yeah.
I'm thinking my students who are going to be watching this, I just want them to know that there's more to come. So stay tuned for the documentary about Dr. Edward Zigler.
Yeah, we're putting one together right now. And I've been looking at some rough cuts of it. We have different people who have been touched by Ed Zigler's work and work really closely with him, people at academic institutions all over the country, but also people in federal government, and people who were a part of the Head Start movement and things like that, talking about the type of work that he did, and some historic footage that's thrown in there as well. So we're very excited about it. We're hoping to have that out by sometime in September. I think the date might be September 13th. That's what we're shooting for.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Gilliam. And it's so fun to hear about your background and education, and how you got to your postdoc, and how you met your mentor, Dr. Zigler, and just the profound effect a good mentor can have on someone is just priceless. So I have some questions now to move into your research, and I want to ask you about expulsion. What is expulsion in the early childhood years, and how is it different from K through 12 settings?
Yeah, I became interested in this background 2002, so 20 years ago, I guess. And basically, it's when we give up on children, when we tell children that we're not the right place for them, when we decide that we can't serve their needs, and we send them home. Some of the times it can be very formal, where you tell a child and a family, you can't be here anymore, then they're expelled and they're kicked out of the program. Some of the times it could be temporary. Some of the times it could be, like maybe these soft expulsions where you tell a child or a parent, you have to come pick Johnny up a little early today. He's having a rough day. And then the next day, you got to come pick him up again. He's having a rough day. And the next day, it's even earlier. And then the next day, it's even earlier than that. And parents have to go to work. I mean, they have jobs, and so if their early care and education program, regardless of what it's called, whether it's called a Head Start program or a pre-K program in a public school or a child care, regardless of what we call it, it serves the function of child care too, so that parents can go to work. And if it's no longer reliable, then it's no longer reliable child care. And for many parents, when they have to come pick their child up early every single day because of a challenging behavior, then they can't rely on it to be able to go to work. When we expel children from child care programs, what we're oftentimes doing is also expelling their parents from employability. And so they have to then remove that child and then try to find another place in the middle of a year that will accept their child in order to be able to keep their job. Or else how they going to feed their family? And so, when you think about it from that standpoint too, I mean, we don't expel children, we expel families. And
it's everybody's affected by an expulsion, not just the child. It affects everyone, and the damage it does to a child. When I first learned about your research, I was finishing up my doctoral program, and I remember when I first heard about it, I thought I knew it happened at school age level, children getting expelled, but I was like so shocked that it happened in early childhood years, because to me, I just thought this, who would ever send an infant, a toddler, a preschool home? I mean, I just like the word expulsion, or the idea of expelling a child from early childhood just shocked me. I just thought, oh my gosh, it's happening. And it was like a dirty little secret. And then when you've done more research and to see that it happens even more often in early childhood than it does in school age, it's like, oh my gosh. And I just get my heart, like, I just get all worked up when I think about what that does to the family and the child when they are expelled. And I'll just give you, this is a little too personal too, but maybe I'll just make it brief. I grew up in a beauty shop. My mom had a hair salon in our house. And so she only did women's hair, and they'd come in for shampoo and set. And usually she's already down in the beauty shop working, before we would be off to school. And so she'd be in and out of the house, getting breakfast ready, making sure we leave, and we would walk to school. And so she was running a business out of our house. And this this principal would call her every once in a while and say, Mrs. Galliano, you need to come and pick up your son. He did X, Y, and Z. And my mom's like, Mr. So-and-so, I cannot leave my beauty shop. I'm in the middle of giving Myrtle a perm. Her hair will fry if I walk out of here now. Mr. So-and-so, he's yours from 9 to 3. Please, just you keep him. And that was in elementary. And so when I found out that not only does it happen in school age settings, in early childhood, oh my gosh, what are we doing? So anyway, back to you, Dr. Gilliam.
I think you should write a book, because when you said I grew up in a beauty shop, is that what you said? Beauty parlor, beauty shop? That's a great opening line for a book. You should make a book.
Oh, Dr. Gilliam, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. When women come into the beauty shop, they share things that they don't even tell their own families or friends. It's therapy, it's fun, it's a party. My mom, I didn't need a TV growing up, because all I needed to do was walk over to the beauty shop, close the door, and I would just be entertained for hours. I just loved sitting at the feet of these ladies telling stories. And oh gosh, we had so many characters coming and going.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. But with that, I got a secret for you. Can I tell you a secret?
Yeah.
Men have that too in barbershops.
Do they really?
Yes, you would not believe the stuff people talk about in barbershops. As a matter of fact, there's been quite a few folks who are interested in sort of like, how does information get shared within communities? and who is trusted within a community. And quite a bit of this has been done in the African American community with African American researchers who have studied the importance and the utility of sharing information through barbershops.
That's awesome.
That's where men gather, that's where men are, that's where we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And I heard one Black scholar who described it this way: it's one of the few places for a lot of men where they feel better about themselves walking out than they did walking in.
Oh, that's awesome.
And as a result, it's just like we when you're sitting in a chair and there's somebody behind you with a sharp instrument, you put yourself in a vulnerable position, and when you're in that vulnerable position, it's such an opportunity to really connect with people in their lives. Like the other instance where that's like really struck me is like at the point of the birth of a child, and the ability of those in NICUs, in neonatal intensive care units, or those who are working within birthing suites, or those who are working within hospitals around the time that a child is born. The ability to be able to connect with a family right at that time when the membrane of that family has become permeable to accept this new child. And now you can also come in too as a source of support. You know what I mean? These little vulnerable moments that we all have where we decide to be vulnerable, and we decide to be vulnerable with certain people, and how can those moments be utilized better by those of us who care deeply about children and families and want to be of use and help? I mean, I think about those kind of things a lot. Do you think about those things? I would imagine that you do.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I saw a bumper sticker recently and it said, "The best day of my life was the day you were born." And as a parent, it's so true that there's nothing that could even come close when a person is born.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
the NICU or
incredible. It's
in the
incredible. I'll tell you one bumper sticker I've never seen. I've never seen a bumper sticker that says "proud parent of an expelled preschooler." And I've never seen a bumper sticker that said, "I'm a teacher and I expelled a child today." And so going back to what we were talking about before, I think the reason that the findings were surprising to people is because, as opposed to the first day, when your child is born and the pride that goes into that, this is one of those phenomena, children being expelled from preschool programs, for which no one is proud.
No.
The parents are oftentimes ashamed of it. The teachers didn't want to do it. I mean, nobody goes into teaching because they want to kick kids out of schools.
Yeah.
They do it because we as a society don't give them the supports they need to do something else. And so I'm often very worried when I talk about this topic, because I'm afraid that when we talk about this topic, and of course we don't want to, you can't blame the child. We're talking about 3-year-old children. In some cases, we're talking about infants and toddlers, that are kicked out of childcare programs. And so we look for somebody to blame. So you blame the parent? Do you blame the teacher? And I worry sometimes that we set ourselves up for blame and shame cul-de-sacs, where the blame goes to one place and it just kind of sits there at a dead end. The real blame is on we the people. We have these amazing, wonderful, terrific early care and education providers who decide that they want to give their lives to children and families. And in many cases, go into this knowing they're going to get paid half as much as a kindergarten teacher. They could get paid better if they were working just about any place else. But they're willing to do this because they love these children that they care about. And that, and I'm not saying we're doing this consciously, but I do worry that as a society, we exploit that. We take advantage of that. We know that they're willing to do this because of love, and so we don't pay them well. We don't give them the supports they need either. And so when our early care and education providers say, what I really need is more help with this. What I really need is more help with, how do you manage challenging behaviors? What I really need help with is, I'm trying to focus on the classroom, but I'm also worried about this one individual child. And we don't give them the supports that they need. We're just basically exploiting them. And so whenever I talk about this, I try to find ways to make sure that we don't rest blame on the parents or rest blame on the teachers. The bigger blame is on us as a society. What kind of supports should we be providing that we're making a conscious or unconscious decision not to provide? And why is that?
I have a question about how you came upon this topic. Was it accidental and you noticed patterns showing up in your research when you were analyzing data? Or did you have a hunch that this was happening and so you designed an experimental, empirical research to try to identify and figure out what was happening? Or
a little bit.
How did you come across this topic?
Yeah, a little bit more like the latter. So I was getting ready to do this big nationwide survey study of pre-K teachers. So these were preschool teachers, mostly in the public schools, but not exclusively. And I was getting ready to launch it, and it was going to go in all the states that had state-funded preschool programs in them. But I was also at the same time supervising child psychology fellows. These are people who are postdocs who had Ph.D.s and they were getting postdoctoral training in clinical psychology, or child psychiatry postdocs and social work people and fellows and developmental pediatrics. And they were all in a clinic at Yale that I was supervising. And it was a clinic to train them on how to work with young children, how to work with preschoolers. And so we'd have this two-way mirror thing. And so I'd be in the observation room and I could look in and watch them working with children and families. And for many of them, this is the first time that they've ever worked with a young child. And maybe they're working with now a 3-year-old, and they're doing a developmental assessment with a 3-year-old, or play therapy with a 3-year-old, or a 2-year-old, 1-year-old in the lap of a parent. And so I'm on the other side, and they would come back and ask me how they're doing, and I'd give feedback, and then it'd go back and forth and everything. And I couldn't help but wonder or notice in this clinic that a lot of the children who are being referred to us for evaluations had been expelled from a child care program, or had been kicked out of pre-K. Or they were told that if they didn't go to Yale and get an evaluation, we're going to kick your child out. In some cases, the evaluation was sort of the ticket to stay in the program. And so I, like a scholar, when seeing that, I went to the literature and I tried to see if there's anything that's actually been published on it. And I could find absolutely nothing published on the topic. And since we were getting ready to go to scale on this big nationwide survey of preschool teachers, I thought maybe I'll just add a few questions in. And so we added a few questions in and into the pilot. And the pilot was in Massachusetts, and I was blown away to find 39% of all the preschool teachers in Massachusetts had expelled at least one child in the past 12 months. I mean, I was shocked. And so I knew, well, we got to keep that in the national survey. So we put it in the national survey, and we got the data back and found out that the rate of children being expelled from preschool programs, 3 and 4-year-olds, was more than 3 times that of grades K through 12 combined. And when you look at childcare programs, it's about 13 times that of grades K through 12 combined. So I was surprised still then with the national data, but I'd already been pre-shocked, because I'd seen what the rates were in the pilot survey. So in a way, what it really came from was the value of doing systematic research, but at the same time being in real environments and seeing things for yourself, and then using that to be able to inform where you think the research should be going. I'm a scholar, I'm a professor, I do research, and oftentimes in research, what we do is we do a study, and then we write the discussion section, and then the discussion section becomes the intro to the next study. And that's great and all, and sort of every study is like a brick in the wall, that you're building in academia. But what if the wall's going askew from reality? What if we start to build more and more bricks, studying things deeper and deeper that are no longer grounded in the reality of children and families and those who serve them? And I think there is a role for academics every once in a while to leave the science and go live in the world and see what actually is happening, and use that at least every once in a while to inform new directions in the science. And in this case, that's what happened for us.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that background. I know it's not something I was going to ask you, but I've been wanting to talk to you about that, how it happened. And I loved hearing that story. The one time I was reading an obituary in the New York Times, there was this man up at Corning in the Finger Lakes, and he worked for the glass company, and they were trying to find different innovations in glass. And so he was in the lab and doing different things, and he left to go to the bathroom, and he came back and he was like, oh no, the heater, it was way too high, the temperature on the machine, the ovens that he was experimenting with. And so he took the glass out, and it dropped and fell on the floor. And he was like, oh my gosh, what just happened? It like bounced, and he wasn't, expecting that. He thought it would shatter or do whatever. And so that's how they sort of discovered Corningware, and how you can take this glass and put it in the microwave. You can put it in the oven. Well, they probably didn't have microwaves back then, but you could put it in the oven. You could put it in the freezer. You could do all these different things because of the technology, but it all happened on an accident. He went to the bathroom, and he didn't realize that the temperature was way too hot. And so I think a lot of times when we do research, it is kind of accidental. Sometimes it's planned. Sometimes we have so many questions that occur as a side effect of what we were really trying to figure out. But then this other thing is so much more interesting, or not more interesting, but it can take us in different directions. And it's what's so exciting about research. And so thank you for sharing that. And I'm always trying to recruit my students to come into grad school and to find the love of research, because it is so exciting. And I loved hearing your story, how you found out about what's happening with these beautiful children. And we don't want to expel anybody. So Dr. Gilliam, who gets expelled?
Well, we found early on that that when you have mixed age classrooms, the older child is more likely than the younger child to be expelled. Bigger children are more likely to be expelled. We had no idea as to why that would be. And so when we found that 4-year-olds are expelled at a rate more than 50% higher than 3-year-olds, we put together focus groups of preschool teachers and asked them why that might be. And teachers oftentimes said, it's one thing if a child's aggressive and the child is smaller, and it's different if the child is also aggressive, but maybe bigger. And so we asked them why that was. And they said that, well, if the child is bigger, then maybe somebody might get hurt. But if the child is smaller and aggressive at the same level, then maybe no one will get as hurt because the other children are as big or bigger than that child. And really, that was our first clue. When I heard that it's really not even completely about the child's behavior. It's about what we adults imagine might happen as a result of that behavior, or what we adults might imagine would have a behavior like that, which child, and so we found early on that the bigger children were more likely to be expelled. We found that our Black children or African American children were more likely to be expelled than white children, about twice as likely. Boys about 4 times as likely as girls. There's an interaction effect for all of those, that the more of those that exist within a child, the greater the likelihood for that child to be expelled. And so our bigger children, our Black children, our boys, all more likely to be expelled. But at the same time, I try to warn people not to make, like that's important to know, but that's in addition to the fact that all children in general in the preschool years are more likely to be expelled than children who are in elementary school, middle school, and high school. A white girl is more likely to be expelled in preschool than a white girl is in elementary school. A white boy, Latino boy, so truly the biggest risk factor for being expelled is just being a preschooler. That's the biggest risk factor. And why that is, I think, is really because it's just so easy to do. When you're talking about children who are in elementary school, middle school, high school, for the most part in most states, these are children of compulsory school attendance age. Legally, they have to be in school. And so when we expel a child from school, when they legally have to be in school, it creates a legal issue because now the child's not in school and legally they're supposed to be in school. And so the process of expulsion becomes a legalized process because it has a legal implication. But when you're talking about preschool children, they don't legally have to be anywhere. They don't have to be in school. For the most part, these are children who are voluntarily attending and voluntarily offered program. I mean, the only exception to that is that special education services, are not voluntarily offered. Schools have to offer that, but other than that, schools don't have to offer, or communities don't have to offer Head Start. They don't have to offer a pre-K program. Childcare programs aren't mandated into existence. So we're talking about children who are voluntarily attending a voluntarily offered program. There is no legal implication whatsoever for telling them to leave. And so really what I think is the reason why we expel so many young children from programs is that it's just so easy to do.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I was going to ask you about risk factors, but I think you kind of covered that about the risk. Do you want to talk a little bit about research and funding research and your Kellogg study and cereal?
Sure. What would you like? What would be useful for me to talk
about research and how funding research and the process of
Sure.
being able to do research and how it happens, how it comes about.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions when we were finding out about children being expelled from preschool programs, such as, why are we expelling boys more than girls? Or why are we expelling our African-American children more than our white children? And so we wanted to dig deeper into some of that. And this is curiosity-led research here. We were very curious about it. And we thought that it might have implications for how we can better serve children and families. So we thought that, well, is it possible that biases might factor into the decisions? Because in the end, children don't expel themselves from preschool programs. Adults expel children. Expulsion is not a child behavior, it's an adult decision. What are the factors that impact that adult decision? Those were the things that were really interesting to me and to my team. And so we came up with this idea that we wanted to study whether or not bias in teachers, because teachers, as wonderful and amazing as they are wonderful, amazing humans. And we all have biases. We all have biases just means expectations, the expectations that we have about something, and that's our bias. And so we thought, well, maybe we could find a way to study that, but it's kind of hard to study kind of bias and unconscious bias. How do you say, unconscious biases are the things we have as expectations that we don't know we have. Do you have any? You can't ask somebody if they don't know they have it. You can't ask them about it. So we needed to have some kind of a way to study it that was a little more roundabout. And so there's this old saying that the eyes never lie. And so we thought, well, maybe we can use that. And so I had some colleagues that were doing research in autism, and they were using this device called an eye tracker that sits on a computer screen at the bottom and shoots a little beam and can tell you down to a pixel on the screen and down to 1,000th of a second where somebody's looking. And they were using that research mostly to be able to show, like in social circumstances, when a child with autism is watching a social interaction, where are their eyes going? Are they looking at the faces? Are they reading facial cues? Are they looking more at the mouth because that's the part of the face that's moving the most? Are they looking completely irrelevant to the human beings? They're listening, but they're watching something else that's completely not a part of the social interaction. And there's other people who have been using these eye trackers too to study things like art in museums. when people appreciate art, how do they understand aesthetics? How do they understand beauty? Do they look at the whole thing? Do they look at details? Do they piece things together? And so there's this fascinating piece of equipment that was used in a lot of different kinds of research, but nobody had ever used it to study biases. And so I was trying to look for this sort of biomarker of bias. And it's not exactly a biomarker, but it's kind of like one, in that people weren't aware always of exactly where they're looking. And so what we did was we set up an old school social psych deception study where the teachers had headphones on, and they had this 6-minute video shot from a variety of different angles so that we could rotate the placement of the children in the screen. And it just so happened that there was a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl sitting at a table playing with Play-Doh. And we tell the teachers that this is a study to see how quickly they can find challenging behaviors in a child before the behaviors become too problematic to be able to manage. That the secret to managing a child's challenging behaviors is to intervene early. So we want you to watch this video. Anytime you see a child do something that could turn into a challenging behavior, hit this button. And we gave them a button to hit. The part of the study that we didn't tell them about at that time is that none of these children will misbehave. None of these children will do anything that will turn into a challenging behavior. And the reason that we know this is because they're all child actors that we'd hired to sit at a table and to play with Play-Doh. And so what we were really interested in this study was, when we lead you to believe that a child might misbehave, where do your eyes go? Who do you look at first? Who do you look at the most? Who do you go back to because you must have missed something? You know, if you weren't a preschool teacher, but instead you were a mall cop, who would you be following at the Gap right now, just in case they take something? You know, that's basically what we were attempting to do with the study. And we got the results back, and it kind of confirmed what we went into the study thinking. You had mentioned the funding before. This was not an easy study to get funded. And in large part, it wasn't an easy study to get funding because no one had ever done anything like it before. And so it was kind of new and unusual and a little strange. And I'm thinking also part of the challenge was that a lot of the funders that we went to were having a hard time believing that you could find evidence of biases in a preschool classroom. You know, and who would ever think to study biases and racial profiling in a preschool classroom? I mean, what a strange place, we figured that you could probably find evidence there simply because, we all have biases. That doesn't make us bad people. Bias is like privilege. It's something that you have that you didn't really ask for. And the shame isn't in having it. Shame is in deciding not to do anything constructive about it. And so we pitched this around, and it took us a while, but eventually we did find a funder who was willing to take a very big chance on it, and that was Kellogg.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
What is empathy deficit, and your research findings related to implicit bias?
Well, we had found in that eye tracking study that teachers, when they're primed to look for challenging behaviors, they spend more time looking at Black children in general, and especially the Black boy. And when we ask them who they think they're looking at more, they say they think they're looking more at boys, especially the Black boy. Either way, the Black boy ended up with the short end of the stick, but the teachers felt that they had an underlying gender-related bias, that boys will be boys. But they didn't think that they had an underlying race bias regarding how Black children behave as opposed to white children. But the eyes suggested that that was really what was at play more than gender. And so that's what we ultimately found regarding the findings. And in terms of like this, the concept of the empathy bias, we had the second part of the study where we give the teachers this vignette to read about a child with some pretty significant challenging behaviors, and we ask them to rate how severe these behaviors are, and we change the name of the child to either imply a Black boy, a Black girl, or a white boy, or a white girl. This kind of stuff as a design has been done a lot in resume studies, where you give employers the same exact resume, but there's a different name at the top. and then you see who gets the most calls, and all the details are the same. It's just.
And how I think I saw somewhere where you explained how you came up with the names.
Mm.
Do you want to share how you
Sure.
selected?
Yeah, we did it in a way that a lot of folks do. So we knew that when we were doing the study, we wanted these children to be 4 years old. And so it was, I think, in 2015, 2016 that we were doing the study. So we counted back 4 years from that. So 2011 or so. And then we looked at birth census records. And you find a name that's very common for a specific group. Say, for instance, a Black boy, but is almost unheard of as a name given to any child who isn't a Black boy. So you want it to be a common name for that group, but not to be confused with another group, so that somebody, when they hear that name, they zero in and they assume that it must be a child of that specific demographic group. And so we did that, and we ended up with some what they call stereotype names, basically names to imply a child of a certain group. One for the Black boy, one for the Black girl, one for the white boy, and one for the white girl. Fairly common technique among people who do these kind of stuff in resume studies and stuff like that. And it worked really well. We even done some pilots, where we give people a name and we ask them to pick out a picture that they think that this child could be.
Now, another question I have for you, Dr. Gilliam. So you've done this research and you have all of this amazing evidence now to show that we have a problem in early childhood education and care. And now what can we do with this problem? So how did you facilitate movement from preschool expulsion as being a research topic and moving it into public interest and doing something with that information now?
Wow, super question. So, I mean, at the very beginning of this, we were really interested in public interest. And we were interested in, moving policy on this. I mean, almost all the work that I do it's about, how can I do some research? How can I do something that's going to move policy in some kind of a very big way? I just tend to think in those kind of terms. When we first did the expulsion stuff back in like 2005 was when we first put out those studies. And I should also say, it turned out that there were some other people who had done studies in preschool expulsion before we came out with our national study in 2005. There was a student in Michigan who was a graduate student who had done her thesis, her master thesis, specifically on expulsion from childcare programs, because there was a survey that was there. It was never published. And so there was no way for us to know about it or anybody else to know about it. And there were a couple of other little tiny surveys like that too, that were done specifically and localized to some other areas. So I do want to point out that there were other people who were breaking this ground, before. We just didn't know about it, and so I guess the lesson in there is, even if you're a graduate student, please publish it.
Yes.
Please publish it so the rest of us can find it. You know what I mean? Especially, you got some great, wonderful ideas. So we were always interested in, like, how do you move the policy? And so when we did this study and we put it out in 2005, we got a lot of media interest in it, because I knew at the time that this was a topic that people hadn't heard about, and it will shock people. And people might not even really believe it at the beginning. They might have to think about it. They might end up going and asking people and finding out, yeah, I can find multiple people who know somebody who's been expelled. I just never had thought to ask them before. So we knew that the first big step is we need to be able to get national public attention to this. And so I worked with a media firm, and I've been doing that ever since. When we have studies that we want to really get out into the public domain, working with a media rollout team. And now also we're working with communications framers on how do you frame some of these kind of topics so that when you roll it out, the frame is a durable frame and people understand it in the way that you're hoping that they will understand it. But when we put this one out and we rolled it out with this very specific media strategy for rolling it out, it got massive amounts of attention. But that was by design, because we knew that we needed to have this massive amount of attention. It was on the front page of the New York Times, front page of the Wall Street Journal, front page. It was in the LA Times. It was in the Chicago Tribune. The New York Times editorial board wrote an editorial on it. The whole editorial board wrote an opinion on this one piece of research. And it was on CNN and a lot of other things. It was covered in media in, I think, 5 different continents. And there was this group in Columbia called the Hechinger Institute for Education in the Media that studies basically how education is talked about in media. And Richard Colvin, who was the director of it at the time, had said that at that time it was the largest media uptake of a single piece of educational research ever. That one study. But it was because I think we had something that would be shocking. We had a media strategy for how we wanted to roll it out. And we also had parents who were talking about their human story behind it, and teachers who were talking about how I really didn't want to have to do this, and I cried over this decision. And so it wasn't just numbers, these were real stories, and people could wrap their head around it. And so I think we had a lot going for us in terms of like making a big media splash out of it. But the thing that I had not planned, was this. I didn't have a piece of legislation that was coming down in government that this would have an impact on. And we didn't have an intervention lined out at that time like we do now, things like early childhood mental health supports, mental health consultation, we have data on it. We didn't have all of those kind of pieces lined up. And so what I ended up doing, unfortunately, was making a really big to-do and then having no place to take it. I got everybody all dressed up, but no party, and so the next time that we did things like that with like the implicit bias things, we made sure that before we released that, we also had data that was coming out on the effectiveness of different interventions and the cost effectiveness of it, and a piece of legislation like the Child Care Development Block Grant that was coming down so that we could weave language into it, so that when we then made a big to-do about something, when we made a big stink about an issue, that it wasn't sort of like an excitement cul-de-sac where you get everybody racing down the road, but then there's no place to go, and so we really kind of structured it totally differently that time. And as a result, we still got a fairly good media uptake, not as much as the first time, but we got a much bigger bang out of it. We were able to get language into the Child Care Development Block Grant. That's a $35 billion piece of legislation that then said that states had to be taking up the issue of preschool expulsion in order to be able to get their federal money. And that was very powerful. So I was working with the Congressional Black Caucus and members of that group, and we got that language kind of put into the bill at the last minute. And as a result of the media uptake that came out of that, at the time that the states were writing these state plans for their money, states became interested in, advocacy groups became focused on this. And then within just a couple of years of that, we had, I think it was 16 states that had significant legislation or regulatory changes specific to children being expelled from preschool programs and reducing that, affecting and reducing expulsion and preventing it for about 1.6 million children, 1.6 million preschoolers who now had protections against being expelled from preschool programs that didn't have it before. And I think the only difference really in the second go around was that in addition to making a big public to-do and a big, huge stink that nobody could avoid, we had a place to take it. So I mean, the one lesson that I think I learned from that too is, you gotta really strategize these things out. It takes a long time to really affect a major change, and it takes a lot of strategizing. And my mentor Ed Zigler, who we started talking out with, he used to say this to students. He used to say, find something you care deeply about. Focus on that. If you don't want to spend 30 years on a problem, don't start. Find
Good
something.
advice.
Yeah.
That is great advice. And I think you should write a book about how how you did that, because that is so hard to do what you did, and how you collaborated with so many different professionals and experts, and how people in media helped you and helped bring this to the forefront, and policymakers, and how change came about. And it didn't happen overnight. And I'm sure it was so hard to come up with a strategy at first, because no one has ever done it like that. I just think it's so interesting.
It was, yeah, it was, yes and no. I mean, it's an interesting thing. It was challenging to come up with the strategy because people hadn't really, like you said, done things quite like that before. But the implementation of the strategy, even though it took a long time, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, because journalists are looking for stories, and we're researchers. We got stories. They are looking for us. They just don't know they are.
I love that.
And policymakers, they're trying to make some kind of a change, and they need something to make a change around, and they need some evidence of it.
We all need each other.
We got that. Yeah, exactly. So in terms of like making it happen, it truly wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Trying to get media attention. Journalists are fairly reliable and they're predictable. If you give them a good story, it's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's got to have some conflict and strife. Like, think about any book that you've ever read. There's the beginning part, you get to know the characters, and then there's some kind of strife, and then there's a resolution, and that's a good story. And if you've got research that can lend itself to that, they need you. They're looking for you, and so in a way, it really wasn't as hard to do as I thought it was going to be.
That's great. What's been the highlight of your career so far?
I remember something that the Dalai Lama once said. Somebody was, this is the way I read the story anyway, somebody going up to the Dalai Lama and said, you always just look so happy. Can you tell me about the happiest time of your life? And the Dalai Lama looked at the person and said, right now. And so the highlight of my career, I am going to say to you, Dr. Macy, is right now. Being able to talk to you about, the kind of things that we both care about deeply, talking to you in a way that maybe can bring students into the conversation, and they can find a place in the story for them to, this is really what it's all about, isn't it? We do our work, and then we hope that our work can be useful to other people who will do their work too and take it in directions that we can't even imagine. So I'm going to go with my highlight of my career is right now with you.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Oh, I mean it. I really do. And thank you so much for doing things like this. It's just really amazing. I think that you have these conversations and bring people into.
Well, it's kind of like being back in the beauty shop. I just love to talk to smart, articulate, aspirational people doing amazing things. And to me, it's so much fun. I love every minute of it.
You're a smart, aspirational person doing amazing things too. So I'm sure you're able to draw on that to know how to set the right kind of table for them.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Gilliam. So I have another question for you.
Sure.
That you might not be expecting because it just happened this morning. So do you ever listen to, or do you have an Alexa?
We do have an Alexa, but I don't always talk to her, but sometimes she talks to me when I'm not expecting it. What did Alexa say this morning?
Well, so I'm taking my daughter swimming this afternoon, and I wanted to know the temperature. So I turned on I started talking to her, and I said, "What's the temperature going to be?" And she said something like, "But by the way, did you know today is Be a Kid Again Day?"
Oh,
so every day she has a new thing, like today is National Donut Day or something day, something special. So today is National Be a Kid Day.
I did not know that.
Again, be a kid.
I did not know that. That's great.
Today,
that's wonderful.
Be a kid again today. So if you could be a kid again, what would you do?
Oh gosh. That's such a great question. And you're right, I did not expect this one. You know, okay, so when I think about being a kid, I think about like play, and I think about being curious, and I think about spending time with my friends. So as much as this is going to sound a little similar to what I said with the Dalai Lama stuff before, I think I want to do what I'm doing right now. I mean, like, I feel like I'm playing with you. We're having fun. I'm being with my friend, so yeah, I'm going to go with that one.
Oh, that is so
I'm
cool.
going to hang out with my friends, and I'm going to talk, and we're going to be curious about stuff. I'm going to wonder about stuff together, just like now.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for telling me that. I had no idea. I feel like I got a license to go do something.
Yeah, there's so many things that Alexa can do that I'm just always interested how people are using it. I have a colleague, a friend of mine, who just wrote a book about 40 things you can do as a teacher with Alexa.
Wow.
Little lesson, different things you can use her for in the classroom.
Do you remember one of them?
Oh gosh, I'll send you her book.
Okay.
I'll
Please
send
do.
it to you, Dr.
do.
Gilliam. So how can podcast listeners follow you?
Okay, I'm not on social media as much as I probably should be, but I do tweet from time to time. And so if you want to follow me at Walter Gilliam, then, WALTERGILLIAM, just like my name is spelled. I do tweet there. But you can also, you don't have to follow me. You can also just talk with me, just send me an email, walter.gilliam@yale.edu, and I can't promise that I can get to every email immediately, but I'll get to you as fast as I possibly can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you and the work you're doing. And thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much. You make me want to have a podcast. I need to get a podcast, and I want to contact you and ask if you'll be my first guest on the podcast, because
I for sure will. Absolutely. I would. That sounds cool.
Hey, thank you so much,
you, Dr. Gilliam.
Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for inspiring students, and thank you for being a beacon of good in the world.
Yes.
Those of us who care deeply about children and families, we're here putting good into the world, and I don't know if we can ever sort of like reflect enough on the fact that that's rough work, that's challenging, and we need each other. And so when you're doing something like this, it just makes me think about just how fortunate we all are that we have people like you who are reminding us about the good that's in the world and the good that we're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for the outreach you're doing and for coming to Kearney recently and being here in Nebraska. And thank you for all of the outreach that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Remember when we were at the coffee shop and we met that lovely student who was there, and she was telling us all about, the great things at UNK and being a student at UNK. How delightful that was.
Yes.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Be well.